Hello students, let's continue. So in our previous lecture, we were talking about political and economic condition of India in the first half of 18th century. So 18th century India was politically fragmented and there was the absence of any strong centralized authority. And once the powerful Mughal state was in a state of decline. And because of rapid decline of the Mughal Empire, there emerged several local kingdoms or provincial kingdoms, and those kingdoms has already been categorized into three: autonomous or semi-independent states founded by the Mughal nobles and courtiers. Then another category was of warrior states like Jat and Sikh states, and the rebel leaders, they had founded those states in course of their rebellion against the Mughal state, against the Mughal empire. And there were other states as well located beyond the boundaries of the Mughal empire, located outside the boundaries of the Mughal empire, like Masurian Riyasat and Travancore state in the peninsular India or in South India. So political condition of 18th century India was not a good one, and there was the absence of strong centralized authorities, and on the other hand, presence of several smaller states. But if we talk about economy of India in the 18th century, or mainly from 1700s till 1750s, first half of 18th century, Indian economy was still in a very strong position because of very strong economic condition or economy provided by the Mughals. And still, India's GDP amounted to around 24.5% of total GDP of the world, and it was around 8.5 times that of GDP of Great Britain. And Indian economy was an export oriented economy with very little amount of import, and for that reason balance of trade and balance of payments were inclined almost completely in favor of India. And in and India's status as a leading exporter of the world was widely acknowledged by the European observers of 18th century, and also the European observers, they considered India as a dumping yard as a dumping yard of gold and silver because of export oriented economy. And the Europeans, the Arabs, they came to India to purchase our handicraft goods, handmade goods and spices. And they take those goods to the European and other markets. They sold out there and they made huge profit. So trade with India was a very profitable, was a very lucrative trade. Trade with India was a profitable or a very lucrative trade. And if you take example of Vasco da Gama, who was a Portugal, a native of Portugal, a sailor and a trader. He reached at Calicut in the year 1498. He landed at Calicut in the year 1498. He purchased Indian handicraft goods and spices and went all the way back to his native place, Portugal. He sold out Indian goods there and he earned 60 times more profit, which clearly indicates that Indian economy was in such a strong position and trade with India was a very lucrative or a very profitable trade. So even economy of India was in a very strong position, but politically India was not in a good state. And even if you talk about society of India in the 18th century. So 18th century Indian society was like its political system, it was not in a good condition, rather in a state of inactivity, in a state of stagnation, ठहराव, stagnation, and dependence on the past. Stagnation and dependence on the past, and full of orthodoxy and superstitious beliefs and practices. Caste was the central feature of the Hindu society, and caste like social division also existed among the Muslims, present among the Muslims. So Muslims were no less divided along the line of clan, power, prestige, and wealth. And Hindus were divided or fragmented along the line of caste system. And caste was the central feature of caste Hindus. And people of the time, people of 18th century India, they practiced sati, which means burning of widows over the funeral pyre of deceased husband. Child marriage was rampant. Parda system was observed, which indicates a kind of mentality when male dominating society observed women as commodities. Parda system was frequent, child marriages were rampant, while on the other hand, widow remarriages were not at all allowed. Untouchability was rampant. The concept of purity and pollution was in practice. Members of lower castes and untouchables were not allowed to fetch water from the wells and ponds of upper castes, and they were also not allowed to take entry into the temples, or even they were not allowed to visit surrounding areas of the temples. So society of India in the 18th century was also not in a good condition. Rather, it was in a state of decline and stagnation, superstitious beliefs and practices, dependence on the past, and people were not ready to come out of their orthodoxy, and they were not ready to come out of their dependence on the past. So 18th century Indian society, right, introductory paragraph, this period was marked by the stagnation, marked by the stagnation and dependence on the past. Stagnation and dependence on the past. There were no uniformity and social patterns, no uniformity and social patterns and people were divided. People were people were by divided by divided by the consideration of, or divided along the line of, divided by caste, religion, region, tribe, language, and other such criteria. So 18th century Indian society was in a rottening condition, in a very bad condition. And people practiced sati, untouchability, child marriages, parda system, and widow remarriages were not allowed. And above all, caste system, jati vyavastha or caste system. So caste system was the central feature of social life of the Hindus in the 18th and 19th centuries. Caste, central feature. And apart from Varna system, which divides Hindus into four Varnas, that is Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. So apart from Varna system, Hindus were divided into number of castes and subcastes based on the concept of purity and pollution. Like the Brahmins were considered to be the most pure and enjoyed ritualistic supremacy. Pure, the most pure or the purest among all by birth, and untouchables were regarded as the most impure or the most polluted among all, and they were treated as inborn impure. Untouchables were treated like inborn impure. So caste, right? Second paragraph. Caste was the central feature of the social life of the Hindus. And even Muslims were also divided. Muslims were divided along the line of clan, vansh, clan, power, prestige, and wealth. They were no less divided. They were no less divided. So, but caste was the central feature of the social life of the Hindus. And apart from Varna system, Hindus were divided into numerous jatis. Jati. There is nothing like caste. Caste is a Portugal term. When Portuguese people came to India to establish trade relations, and when they started observing the caste system, or in fact jati vyavastha, jati arrangement of the Hindus, they gave this term casta. So casta is a Portugal term, while Varna Vyavastha, Varna system divides Hindus into four, and Jati Vyavastha divides Hindus into more than 3,000 jatis and upjatis, castes and subcastes. Okay, so apart from Varna system, Hindus were divided into numerous jatis, numerous jatis which differed in their nature from place to place, so because there are numerous features of the caste system and castes, every caste has its specific nature which is different from other caste or another caste, so which differed in their nature from place to place or from region to region. And the higher castes like Brahmins and Kshatriya castes, there are numerous Brahmin castes. There is a Brahman Varna. Brahman Varna is the one, but there are many castes within the Brahmins like Pandey, Mishra, Shukla, Chaturvedi, Trivedi, Dvedi, several castes, and there are several castes within the Kshatriya Varna. There are Suryavanshis, Suryavanshis, Chandravanshis, Agnikul, Kshatriyas, Gurjar Pratiharas, large number of castes, Kshatriya castes, then Vaishya castes and Shudra castes. So while Varnas are only 4 in number, but castes and subcastes are innumerable, even more than 3000. While higher castes enjoyed dominance or monopoly of resources, and usually members of lower castes were deprived. Members of lower castes were deprived of resources and other such benefits. So higher castes headed by Brahmanas, higher castes headed by Brahmanas monopolized all social structures, prestige and privileges. Isn't it? We are talking about Indian society in the 18th century, not in this year 2020, 2021, 22. ये सब जो आने वाला पहले 2019 इसका नहीं है ना. Social structures, prestige and privileges. Okay, so caste rules. See, caste rules were extremely rigid. Caste rules were extremely rigid, and caste rules were forcefully implemented. Extremely rigid and forcefully implemented. And there were sorry, there were caste panchayats. There were caste panchayats or khap, also known as khap, K-H-A-P, khap panchayat. So caste panchayats or khap panchayats forcefully implemented caste related rules, prestige and privileges. And caste rules were extremely rigid. Caste rules were extremely rigid and enforced by caste panchayats, commonly referred to as khap panchayat, caste panchayats or khap panchayats, and caste chief, caste chiefs, head of the caste, caste panchayat and chief of the caste, and through through fines, punishment, other punishment, corporal punishment, and sometimes expulsion, expulsion from the caste or jati bahishkrit, expulsion, expelling out of the caste. So caste rules were very rigid and forcibly implemented by caste panchayats and their chiefs through fines, physical or corporal punishments, and expulsion from caste. Okay, so there are several features, characteristics of caste, and if we would observe characteristics of the castes, so caste system divides Hindus into numerous segments, numerous segments. So caste system causes segmental division of society, segmental division of society. First one, then characteristics of, we are talking about characteristics of caste, segmental division of society. It causes segmental division of Hindu society and hierarchy of groups. So there is a hierarchy, hierarchy of groups. Hierarchy means upper and lower, upper castes and lower castes. A particular hierarchy has to be maintained. A particular hierarchy is required to be maintained, and that criteria of hierarchy is the purity and pollution. I will talking about purity and pollution later on. Segmental division of society, hierarchy of groups, then restrictions on feeding, restrictions on feeding, like Brahmins, they were not supposed to receive any food item, or they were not supposed to eat anything from the members of lower castes and untouchable. Forget about dining, about feeding. Brahmins tended to maintain distance from untouchables, like Brahmanas, or if you take example of Nambudiri Brahmins of Kerala, Nambudiri, Nambudari, Nambudiri Brahmins of Kerala. So Nambudiri Brahmins of Kerala considered themselves very pure Brahmins, ritualistically pure, and the supreme even among the Brahmins themselves. And they uh, sought to maintain minimum distance of 32 feet and 16 feet from Ijhava and Pulayan outcasts. From Ijhava and Pulayan outcasts. So there were restrictions on feeding. Then there were religious disabilities, like members of lower castes lower caste, mainly Shudra and untouchables, they were not allowed to enter into the temples. And if they wanted to worship the god, they were expected, they were required to construct their own temples, their own idols or images of the deities. They were not allowed to take entry into the temples of upper caste. Even temples were also dominated by the members of upper caste, mainly Brahmins. Okay, so religious disabilities and lack of choice of education and profession. Lack of choice of education and profession. So, son of a father of a particular caste was required to learn that particular profession of the caste. Like son of a blacksmith was expected to learn the art of his father. Son of a carpenter was going to be a carpenter. Son of a potter was supposed to be a potter. So if a potter wanted to be a blacksmith or a carpenter or a priest or a fighter, he was not allowed to do so. So there was lack of choice of education as well as profession. And inter-caste marriages were seldom performed or possibly never performed. So there were restrictions on marriage. There were restrictions on marriage. So there were several characteristics. There were several characteristics of caste. Several characteristics of caste. It's like caste system caused segmental division of society, hierarchy of groups, restrictions on feeding, religious and allied disabilities, lack of choice of education and profession, and restrictions on marriage. And the criteria of this hierarchy of castes was based on the concept of purity and pollution. Like Brahmins on the top, Brahmins, they claimed to be the supreme, and Shudras were kept at the bottom. Brahmins at the top and Shudras at the bottom of social hierarchy or hierarchy of castes. And Brahmins were considered to be the most pure or the purest among all. Brahmins were treated as the most pure or the purest among all, and they claimed they claimed ritualistic supremacy. They claimed ritual, like performing religious functions. So because of performance of religious functions, Brahmins considered themselves to be the most pure or the purest among all, or inborn paidaishi, inborn pure. While on the other hand, Shudras were considered to be the most impure, or the least pure or inborn impure, inborn impure, and a sizable section of Shudras, not all the Shudras, but a sizable section of the Shudras was considered to be untouchables. Untouchables. For example, Mahar, untouchables of Maharashtra, Ijhawa and Pulayan, Ijhawa and Pulayan. So Ijhawa and Pulayans and Mahars, they were considered to be so impure that they were treated as outcasts. So they were treated as outcasts, Jati Bahishkrit, outcasts. So because of their impurity, even they were not considered fit to be the part of the caste system, and they were treated like outcasts. Outcast. Okay. So hierarchy. This was a system of hierarchy, while Brahmins were treated as the most pure and Shudras least pure. So the Brahmins claimed ritualistic supremacy, and a sizable section of the Shudras for untouchables, Achut or untouchables, were treated as outcasts or Jati Vyavastha se Bahar, outside the caste system. They were so highly impure that they were treated like outcasts outside the caste system. Okay, so this was the basis of hierarchy, division or hierarchy, and a particular hierarchy was expected or required to be maintained. And restrictions, say characteristics of caste में, हर caste में आप देखेंगे, you would observe carefully about the caste system. Every caste system has its common name, common name, common descent, एक पूर्वज, common descent, a particular profession, homogeneous community, and hereditary membership, membership by birth. So if a person was born in an Ijhawa family and by birth he was an Ijhawa. Okay, so caste system, okay, caste system ने कबाड़ा निकाल रखा था 18th सेंचुरी में इंडिया सोसाइटी का, अभी भी काफी हद तक. So a caste system is one whereby a society is divided into a number of, caste system is a system in which or whereby a society is divided into a number of self-contained and completely segregated units. The mutual relationship mutual relationship between them are ritually determined. Ritually determined. Ritual supremacy. Because of performance of rituals and sacrifices at the temples, Brahmanas claimed this supremacy, while untouchables were involved in doing menial works, saf safai, leather working, other such works, cremation of dead bodies, de-skinning of animals, so they were treated like untouchables. So what kind of hell was that? Caste system. And merely chanting mantra is supposed to be ritually supreme, and those members who are involved in sanitization and other very important work, they were treated like untouchables. But that was the system, and we have to know, we have to study that system. So caste system is one whereby society is divided into a number of self-contained and completely segregated units. And caste system has several other characteristics as well, like common name. Common name means title. Title like Tiwari, Mishra, Shukla, Singh, isn't it? Common name or common title. Then common purvaj, common forefather, common descent. Common descent. Like all the Brahmins, they would claim that they are the descendants of Parshuram. So Brahmins, they, in an act of praise, they shout, they are shouting slogans to praise their forefather Parshurama. Parshuram Maharaj ki jai. Then mm, Kayastha caste. Kayastha caste. They would raise slogan about their forefather Chitragupta Maharaj ki jai. So common descent, common name, common and profession was determined by birth. So son of a blacksmith caste was going to be a blacksmith, son of a carpenter caste was going to be carpenter, son of a potter caste was going to be a potter. Profession. And because of same profession, there was homogeneity, homogeneous community. Members, homogeneous community means members of similar caste, members of same caste. And fifth one, hereditary membership and caste endogamy, same caste marriage. Inter-caste marriages were not at all allowed. Even today, if you would try to perform inter-caste marriage, possibly you are going to be killed by your own family members, called honor killing, in to save honor of the caste. Hereditary membership and endogamy. And say not only Muslims, not only Hindus, even Muslims were equally divided into number of units. So right, next paragraph. Muslims were no less divided by consideration of caste like structure, though not exactly caste like structure, race, kabila, tribe, even though even though their religion, Islam, their religion enjoined equality. So, propagator of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, gave the message of equality, and Muslims are divided. Muslims are no less divided into large number of units, and at present Muslims are divided into 117 communities, like caste system. Even though institution of caste is absent among the Muslims, but Muslims are divided into 117 sects and subsects, even though their religion enjoined equality. Even though their religion enjoyed social equality on them, and still they are divided into number of self-contained and segregated units. Okay, so society, Hindu society, Muslim society, Sikh society, Parsi society of 18th century India, society was patriarchal or male dominating in nature. It was not matriarchal. Except for few tribes, society was patriarchal. Okay, so next paragraph. Society was patriarchal or male dominating, and head of the family enjoyed absolute control over other family members. Head of the family, father or uncle, head of the family, elder brother, enjoyed absolute control over other family members. And family society, when society was patriarchal, family was also patriarchal or male dominating in nature. So the family system in the 18th century, the family system in the 18th century India was primarily or mainly patriarchal, mainly patriarchal or male dominating, mainly patriarchal or male dominating, and women of the time, women of 18th century India enjoyed or possessed little individuality of their own, little individuality of their own. They were deprived of their individual rights, and all marriages were arranged by the heads of the families, and several other social malpractices were in practice. So the family system in the 18th century India was primarily patriarchal, and women of the time possessed little individuality of their own. All marriages were arranged by the heads of the family, and there were several social malpractices like child marriage was child marriages were frequently observed on a large scale, frequently observed. Sati system was in practice. Sati system was in practice, which means burning of widows or the funeral pyre chitta, funeral pyre of deceased husband. Husband की डेथ हो गई, चिता पर हाथ पैर बांध के डाल दिया, जला दिया. Okay, sati system. And female infanticide was also in practice. Female infanticide was in practice. Killing of female child, not embryo, fetus. Ultrasonography technique was not present in 18th century India. So after the birth of a baby, and when it was found out that a female child was born, so usually female childs were killed. They were poisoned. Okay, so female infanticide was also in practice. Then Parda system was rampant, which means treating women as Parda system means treating women as commodities. It's a kind of mentality. Parda system, to objectify the women or to treat women as commodities. Okay, so Parda system was rampant, and polygamy. Polygamy was also in practice. Parda system, polygamy. While on the other hand, widow remarriages were not allowed. Widow remarriages were not allowed. Okay, so this is all about social condition of India in the 18th century. Now see, politically and socio-culturally, 18th century India was not in a good condition. But for economic reasons, India was in a good state or good condition. Okay, so actually 18th century polity, economy and society, are characterized by trend. There was a trend characterized by trends that reflect both continuity and change. Continuity and change. Continuation of previous things an addition of new things, continuation of some previous institutions, addition of or introduction of new ones. So right to next paragraph. 18th century polity, economy and society. 18th century polity, economy and society are characterized by trends trends that reflect both change and both change and continuity. Change and continuity, दोनों चीजें 18th century इंडिया में, change as well as continuity. Like when the Mughal state was in a state of decline, and the later Mughal rulers like Bahadur Shah, Jahandar Shah, Farrukhsir, Muhammad Shah, Ahmad Shah, Alamgir II, Farrukhsir, they failed to patronize the artists because of lack of wealth, lack of money. They failed to patronize painters, musicians, artists, singers. So artists, they shifted, they left the Mughal court because of poverty, because of decline. They left the Mughal court and they reached at the capitals of provincial centers, provincial kingdoms like Awadh, Bengal, Hyderabad, Marathas, Mysore, and there they introduced the Mughal style of painting, Mughal style of singing, Mughal art and architecture. So the Mughal Empire was in a state of decline, but the Mughal artists, when they shifted to the provincial kingdoms, there they introduced several old features of the Mughal Empire, which means continuity of the Mughal painting, continuity of the Mughal architecture, and other things. So continuity as well as change, because regional kingdoms, they also introduced their own taste. They had their own taste, but they also adopted tastes of the Mughal artists. So there was the continuity and there was a kind of change. Continuity as well as change. So 18th century India was a century of continuity and a century of change. Change and continuity. How so? Right further. The artists shifted to the artists shifted to other regional centers as the Mughal Empire became insufficient. Mughal Empire became insufficient to pay the artists, or to support their patronage or sanrakshan. Patronage. So the Mughal emperors, later Mughal emperors, because of lack of money, because of lack of resources, they failed to employ, they failed to patronize the artists. And the artists shifted from Delhi to regional centers like Hyderabad, Murshidabad, Lucknow, Mysore, Travancore, and other regional or local kingdoms. So insufficient to support their patronage. So this was a kind of change. Change means artists shifted from Delhi to regional centers, but when they reached there at the regional centers, they introduced the Mughal styles, which caused continuation of the Mughal style. Okay, so continuity as well as change. Patronage. So this change was juxtaposed with an element of continuity. This change was juxtaposed with an element of continuity as well as this change was juxtaposed with an element of continuity. So change as well as continuity. So like for example, if Delhi Delhi was the capital of the Mughal Empire. Okay, Delhi, the capital city of the Mughal Empire, while Lucknow, capital of Awadh, and Murshidabad, capital of Bengal. So Lucknow and Murshidabad. So at Lucknow and Murshidabad, same Mughal administration was implemented. Same Mughal administration and economic pattern was implemented. Okay, na? So continuity of the Mughal administration. This was like continuity of the Mughal administration. Okay, and the Mughal emperor was still the nominal head. नाम का ही सही, head वही है, nominal head. Okay, so Mughal emperor was still the nominal head, and at the regional capitals like Lucknow, Murshidabad, Hyderabad, same Mughal administration and economic pattern was implemented. So ये continuity है, continuity. और चेंज क्या है, कुछ ना कुछ रीजनल नवाब्स, राजा रजवाड़ास, they also introduce their own elements of administration. So this caused continuity as well as change. Okay, so Delhi and other regional capitals. So we can write conclusive paragraph, conclusion for answer writing purpose. We can conclude that we can conclude that 18th century India cannot be seen as a period of total decline. Cannot be seen as a period of total decline, be it politically, socially, and economically. Period of decline, but not complete decline, but not total decline. To some extent, to some extent, it was a meaningful period. To some extent, it was a meaningful period and not simply a dark age. It was a meaningful period and not simply as a complete dark age or complete a century of complete darkness. So partial darkness, partial change, juxtaposed, juxtaposition means change as well as continuity. Simply as a dark, not simply as a dark age, but a meaningful period, but to some extent, and mainly economically. Economically, India was in a good position, but politically and socially, India was in a bad position. Okay, na? So this is all about socio-economic and political condition of India in the 18th century. So 18th century India is not just a century of darkness. It was, to some extent, it was a meaningful period. At least for economic reasons, India was still in a good position, and also culturally, for cultural reasons as well. Like 18th century India had also witnessed development of music, dance, and drama. Like development of Kathak was a significant achievement. So Kathak as a dance form developed at the court of Nawabs of Awadh. And then Hindustani classical, some breakthrough were also made in the field of music system of India, in particular Hindustani music system of North India. Meaningful period, not simply a dark age. Okay, so 18th century India, 18th century India is very often regarded as a century of darkness. True to some extent, but not completely. Okay. So, apart from this topic, actually, this topic is not mentioned in our syllabus. First topic of paper 2 Modern India is about the European penetration into Indian subcontinent. European penetration into India, or advent of the advent of the Europeans, advent of the Europeans. So during or from, say, from 9th, 8th to 19th century till 14th century, trade between trade between Europe and India. Trade between Europe and India from 8th or 9th century Common Era till 14th century Common Era for a period of 600 or 700 years. The the Arabs acted as the mediators. The Arabs acted as the mediators. So Arabians, they acted as the mediators. And why they acted as the mediators? Why not the European? Why not the Indian traders went all the way to the European countries to sell their goods and commodities directly to the Europeans? So because of caste system. So because Indians avoided establishing long distance oceanic voyages. Indians avoided establishing taking long distance oceanic voyages because of caste system. Because of caste system and caste related rigidities. And caste system prohibited Indians crossing the seas. So caste in those days, caste system prohibited crossing the ocean, or what big water bodies. So Indians had hesitated crossing the seas, and that's why they avoided taking long distance oceanic voyages. So the Arab merchants, they acted as mediators between this uh, uh, between trade between India and Europe. So the Arabs came to India, mainly South India. They purchased cotton and silk cloths. They purchased steel swords, some sort of guns, and mainly spices, and they took those commodities to the European markets. They sold out there and they made huge profits. They made huge profit. So trade with India was a lucrative trade. Trade with India was a lucrative trade. But around 15th century Common Era, Arab merchants were replaced by the Europeans. So 14th century onwards. Okay, so Arab Arab merchants were replaced by the Europeans, who started coming to India via oceanic trade route. via long distance oceanic trade routes and acted as the mediators. Acted as the mediators. So, in the year 1498, in the year 1498, a native of Portugal, a native of Portugal named uh, Vasco da Gama. He sailed out from Lisbon, capital city of the Portugal. He sailed out from Lisbon. He took three ships named Nina, Shanta, Pinta, three ships, and he risked his life, his property, his wealth, each and everything. Sailed out from Portugal and following the coasts of Africa continent and Madagascar, then following the coasts of Arabian Peninsula and Arabian Sea. Eventually, in 1498, Vasco da Gama landed at Calicut in Kerala. And when he landed there at Calicut, he was very well received by the ruler of Calicut. He was warmly welcomed. Vasco was warmly welcomed by the ruler of Calicut, bearing hereditary title of Jamorin. So rulers of Calicut were called Jamorin, their hereditary title. So Jamorin welcomed Vasco da Gama because Vasco da Gama was going to purchase handicraft goods and spices and was going to pay in terms of gold and silver. Then Vasco purchased cotton and silk cloths, guns, swords, and spices, mainly black pepper, cardamom, and other such spices. And Vasco returned back from India to Lisbon, Portugal, returned back to his native place. And when Vasco da Gama sold out Indian goods there, he earned 60 times more profit, 60 times profit than his investment, which clearly states that trade with India was a very lucrative trade, very profitable trade. So eventually, or slowly and gradually, the Arabs were replaced by the Europeans once the Europeans came to realize about the importance of oceanic trade routes and trade with India. So first to reach India to establish trading relationship after 14th century were the Portugal people came to India, followed by the Dutch people from Holland or Netherlands, then the English, the British, and at the end, around 1664, the French people came to India. So Portugal, Dutch, English, and French came to India because trade with India was a very, very lucrative or profitable trade. And this was the beginning of the European commerce in India and advent of the Europeans. So instead of Arabs, now the Europeans started purchasing Indian goods and they sold out Indian goods to the European market. Okay, so right, first one. The Portuguese. Portuguese, right? Few important points could be important also for your IS preliminary examination, but this discussion is for history optional. So we are discussing in depth. We are trying to discuss all the facets, all the aspects. Vasco da Gama received friendly treatment from the ruler of Calicut, bearing the hereditary title of Jamorin. Vasco sold out Indian goods into the European market and earned 60 times profit, which clearly indicates which clearly indicates that trade with India was a lucrative or very profitable. Lucrative or very profitable. Okay. So soon, soon the Portugal, they came to realize about the importance of oceanic trade and oceanic trade routes, oceanic trade and maritime trade routes. And they tried, Portugal people, they tried their best to establish supremacy over the maritime trade routes because they had already realized the importance of oceanic or maritime trade routes. They were very clever people and immediately they realized the importance of oceanic trade route about the episode of Vasco da Gama and his earning. They immediately realized the importance of maritime trade routes. So at second point, next next year or 1500, Pedro Alvarez Cabral, another Portugal sailor, Pedro Alvarez Cabral, sailed out from Lisbon, capital of Portugal, Lisbon, to India. Lisbon to India to establish to establish Portugal's supremacy in Eastern Seas. Portugal's supremacy in Eastern Seas by forcibly depriving the merchants of other nations. They were not Portugal people. They were not in a mood to allow other Europeans to establish uh, maritime trade with India or other regions or nations like Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, Malacca, Borneo. They were not at all interested in sharing their dominance in the eastern seas. So they became hostile, aggressive or hostile in nature, and they started depriving merchants of other European nations. They started quarreling among each other to establish their supremacies in the eastern seas. So Portugal began to take part Portugal began to take part in the political conspiracies among the states. So they favored states as per their interests. So they started interfering into the internal matters of Indian states. They conspired against it. They started conspiring against the Indians. So political, they started taking part in political conspiracies among the Indian states. Okay, and states, they entered into alliance with Cochin state, the enemies of Calicut. So they never remained neutral. They started interfering into the internal matters. Like in case of disputes between two Indian states, and Cochin and Calicut. Cochin and Calicut, the Portugal in India, they made alliance with Cochin state. Okay. So Pedro Alvarez Cabral, Vasco da Gama, when Vasco da Gama reached India, his objective was purely trade, purely to purchase Indian goods and to make profit. But when Pedro Alvarez reached India, and his objective was to establish the Portugal supremacy in the eastern seas, and the Portugal started conspiring against the Indian states. They started taking part in the conspiracies between the states. And next para or next paragraph or next point, it was Alfonso de Albuquerque. It was Alfonso, another Portugal, Alfonso de Albuquerque, who led the Real foundation of Portuguese power in South India. Real foundation of Portuguese in India. So Alfonso. So there is a variety of mango named after Alfonso de Albuquerque. Alfonso mango. Okay, so real foundation of Portuguese in India. He was appointed. He was appointed Alfonso de Albuquerque. He was appointed the governor of he was appointed the governor of Portuguese affairs in India. Governor of Portuguese affairs in India. Governor Alfonso de Albuquerque became the governor of Portuguese affairs in India, and Alfonso was politically also very ambitious. Politically ambitious. He was a politically ambitious man, and in 1510, in the year 1510, he captured Goa. He captured Goa, a port, a rich port from a South Indian kingdom of Bijapur. Bijapur. And Goa was a very profitable port. So he, right further, like this, in 1510, Alfonso conquered from Bijapur. Alfonso conquered from Bijapur the rich port of Goa. And in order to increase their population in India, in South India, Alfonso de Albuquerque inspired the Portuguese in India to marry locally, to marry Indian wives. बोले यही शादी ब्याह करो, यही नंबर बढ़ाओ. रिच पोर्ट आगे लिखिएगा. He encouraged his fellow countrymen to marry Indian wives. Okay. So in course of time, Portuguese in India made their settlements, bastiyan, their settlements at Goa, Goa, Daman, Div, Goa, Daman, Div, Chaul, Bombay. Bombay was just a small village. When Bombay was settled by the Portugal people, it was a small village, not an urban center. Bombay became an urban center or a big center once it was captured and inhabited by the Britishers. Okay, so Portuguese, right, next point. Portuguese made their settlements in Diu, Daman, Salsette, Basin, Chaul, Bombay, and another one, San Thome near Madras, and Hooghly in बंगाल. बस्तियां बनाई पोर्चुगल लोगों ने, ओके, और इंडिया के ल्यूक्रेटिव ट्रेड में पार्टिसिपेट करने लगे. बट दे कुडंट सस्टेन, पोर्चुगल पीपल, दे कुडंट सस्टेन फॉर मोर for a longer period of time in India because of discovery, because of their capture of Brazil. So Portugal captured Brazil in South America continent, and Brazil was full of resources, gold, platinum, zinc, bauxite, cuprite, wood, and whatnot. So the Portugal shifted their focus from India to Brazil. So they were no more interested in making more number of settlements in India, but they continued their settlement in India, few settlements in India till 1961, even after independence, 14 years after independence. In particular, Goa, Daman and Diu. Goa, Daman and Diu, which the Portugal retained in India till 1961. Okay, right further. In course of time, they lost most of their settlements into the hands of the Dutch from Netherlands. The Dutch तीन छोड़ के सब गवा दिया, with the exception of Goa, Daman and Diu. With the exception of Goa, Daman and Diu, which they retained till 1961. Goa, Daman and Diu, which they retained till 1961. So actually, religious intolerance, their clandestine practices, they also wanted to spread Christianity. So they became religiously intolerant. Their clandestine practices, their religious intolerance, their interferences into the local affairs, and discovery of Brazil drew their attention from India, from Southeast Asia towards Brazil. And also they failed to compete successfully with the other European nations. And these were the reasons or causes for their decline. Okay, so right, next point or last point, in fact, their religious intolerance. their religious intolerance, clandestine practices, wrong practices, unfair practices in trade, discovery of Brazil, and their failure to compete successfully. Their failure to compete successfully with other European powers. Compete successfully with other European powers. So they were Portugal, they were kicked out of India by the Dutch from Holland, and also they drew their attention from India towards Brazil, which was full of resources, and Brazil was the next destination or main destination of the Portugal in South America continent. So Portugal people were replaced by the Dutch in India. Okay, so right, next one, the Dutch. So once the Dutch came to know that trade with India was a very lucrative trade, and that Indian handicraft goods and spices were in great demand throughout the European market. So they were also willing to come to India, and with the view to getting direct access to the markets in India and Southeast Asia, the Dutch East India Company was formed in the year 1602. Okay, so at first point. With the view to getting direct access to the markets in India and Southeast Asia, but mainly Indonesia. Indonesia was also full of spices, and South India and Southeast Asia. The Dutch East India Company came into existence. The Dutch East India Company came into existence in 1602. 1602. While the Dutch were focusing mainly towards Southeast Asia, not India. Their main focus was not India. Their main focus was Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, Malacca, Borneo, Southeast Asia. So in 1605, the Dutch captured Amboina, captured sub-Southeast Asia, captured Jakarta, Indonesia, Jakarta and Batavia in 1619, and captured Goa in, या इसको रहने देते हैं फिलहाल, अभी देख लेते हैं, Southeast Asia. So Dutch, they were concentrated more towards Southeast Asia and less towards India. So they came to the islands of Java, Sumatra, and Malacca. Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, and Malacca, attracted by the lucrative trade in black pepper and spices, other spices. So at next point, the Dutch came to the islands of Java, Sumatra, Java, Sumatra, and Malacca, attracted by the profitable or lucrative trade in pepper and spices. While they also made some settlements in India, but mainly confined towards Southeast Asia. So in India, in South India in particular, in India, their important centers were at their important centers were at Masulipatanam, Pulikat, Bimlipatnam, Karaikal, Chinsura, Nagapatnam, etc. Okay. So in India, their important centers were located at Masulipatanam, Pulikat, Bimlipatnam, Karaikal, Chinsura, Nagapatnam. So mainly Tamil Nadu and Kerala, from where they could get spices, mainly black pepper and cardamom and other spices. So the Dutch people, they practically maintained monopoly. The Dutch practically maintained a monopoly of the spices trade in the East throughout the 17th century. But they failed to compete with another European power which emerged more powerful than the Dutch East India Company. And that company was the British East India Company. So the Dutch were eventually replaced by the British from India, mainly from India. So next point, the Dutch practically maintained the Dutch practically maintained a monopoly of the spices trade, monopoly of the spices trade in the East throughout the 17th century. Okay, but eventually the Dutch, they were defeated by the British in India. The Dutch were defeated by the British East India Company, and in 1759 they were kicked out of India. They were forced to leave India. So right, last point, or in fact last paragraph. Dutch were finally defeated by Dutch were finally defeated by the British at the Battle of Bedara, fought in the year 1759. Dutch were finally defeated by the British at the Battle of Bedara in 1759, and they were forced to leave India. They were forced to leave India, Dutch. So eventually in 1759, they were forced to leave India. So Portugal people were kicked out of India by the Dutch, and the Dutch were kicked out of India by the British. But Britishers were not kicked by anyone. Rather, the Britishers kicked another European power, the French, who came to India after the Britishers in 1664. And eventually only the British East India Company and the Britishers were left in India, and slowly and gradually within a short span of 100 years, India became a colony of the British East India Company. Okay, so right, third European power, the British. The British. और यहाँ पे छोड़ देते हैं. Okay. In our next discussion, we will be talking about the British and the French, and the British and the French rivalry, and consequently the British East India Company emerged victorious, and in 1760 the French were kicked out of India, and the British East India Company remained the sole European power, or the only European power in India. And from 1757 till 1857, the British East India Company became the honor of the Indians and established its empire in India, okay, called the British India. So I think sufficient for today. Next lecture में मिलते हैं. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks a lot.